Good morning, everybody. I'm here with Brad Phillips, the Chief Information Officer here at Village Core. Good morning, Brad. Since you're the first in our series of conversations with the board of Village Core, I was wondering if you could tell us about the organization's mission and how your work got you to where you are now with Village Core.
Certainly. Nice to talk with you today. So Village Core is a nonprofit organization that is focused on empowering elder adults to design a joyful life. This is something that I came to through my personal experiences in helping my elders, my family, to be able to deal with some of the things as they became more elderly and needed more assistance and things. And now as I myself am beginning to think about, well, I need to organize my own life to make sure that I don't run into some kind of issues that I saw them running into. Using these lessons learned is something that I wanted to try to assist others with.
That's very interesting. I've heard before that you have worked on a pig farm and then worked in many different industries of medical care and other healthcare professions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I grew up on a farm in Southern Illinois, a pig farm. Shortly after I became conscious, I said, God, why did you put me on a pig farm? And I did everything in my power to try to not do anything with pigs. As a result, I wound up going into computer science, about as far away from pig farming as you could possibly organize yourself to be. And I enjoyed being in the country, don't get me wrong. But being on the pig farm gave me lots of practical experiences that I was able to use later on. But going into the field of computers at that point, that was back in the punch card and paper tape era. And we were just beginning to get into network computers. The IBM PC was just kind of beginning to be thought about at that point. It was all mainframes and that kind of thing, computer time sharing systems. I actually did an internship at General Motors and worked on robotics in one of their plants where they make pickup trucks. That was a really interesting environment, where the orders for pickup trucks would come in and from the various dealerships, and every pickup truck got built custom, gas engine, diesel engine, this many cylinders, that many cylinders, this, dual axles, or this, that, and the other, what color. So every truck came through, and the computers were organizing all of the materials and everything to the plant. And I got to work on that. It was fascinating work. And after that, worked on some early computer systems that were called time sharing systems. And those really were needed because PCs didn't exist.
Mm.
Cell phones didn't exist. Things that we take for granted these days were like, a half a gigabyte of storage was a device the size of a washing machine, and now it's on a little tiny chip, that's, it's the size, less than the size of a postage stamp. Never mind that people don't really know what postage stamps are anymore because they do everything electronically. That's another story. Um, but anyway, I got involved with working in quality assurance and systems management, and ultimately wound up getting involved with a company that was doing life support services for open heart surgery. So this was a company that would go into a hospital, and they would uh, hire the people that ran the heart lung machines that were used to keep people alive while they were having like a heart bypass.
Wow.
procedure done. So we would hire those people. We would buy the equipment from the hospital. We'd buy all of the supplies because the machine is actually an artificial lung. It's actually quite fascinating because when you stop somebody's heart, you stop them from breathing. So
Yeah.
you have to breathe for them using an artificial lung. And there are many different kinds, but the predominant time at the time I was in the industry was a cylinder of straws, and you'd run the blood through the straws and pass air over the straws to draw out the carbon dioxide and put in oxygen, and that you were breathing for the patient. So it was an interesting experience because I was hired to write a computer program to manage the information about how the procedures were done in the operating room. And so I wound up being trained. So I started as a computer scientist, and then I got trained as somebody to do medical stuff. So I've been in the operating room dozens of times with people, humans. When they trained me on a dog, which is kind of sad. But if you think about it, it's like, you got to learn, and you don't want to learn on people. So it's like,
Yeah.
what, just it's tough, but you gotta realize these things need to happen. So anyway, so I worked for that company for quite a few years, and wound up implementing like warehousing systems and billing systems and all kinds of things. And ultimately wound up, after that company was acquired, I went off into the pharmaceutical field and was involved with a drug a drug delivery system, I should say, for neoplastic meningitis. So this is a fast moving cancer of the spinal column, basically. And it's usually, once you get it, you die within 2 months. It's a terrible, terrible cancer.
Yeah.
And the only way to treat it is to inject chemotherapy into the spinal column. It's
Wow.
tough. It's tough
Yeah.
to do. It's tough on the patient. If you're getting chemo into your spine, man, it's crazy. So remember, I'm a computer guy, and I'm getting involved in all these other insane things. And then what happened is they came up with this idea that you could put the chemo into a foam and inject the foam, and it would gradually disperse. So rather than hitting the patient hard, it would trickle into their system as the foam dissolved. Very cool. The company still exists. And then I went off and worked at drug discovery companies and helped with basically one of the things I did was how you can go to Google and search for a word. We basically had Google for chemicals. So you could actually put in the chemical structure that you were looking for, because the idea that you had was there's you need to block some activity in the body from happening, like an allergy or something, whatever it is. And there's a structure in the body, in a protein, that you need to have something fit into that protein structure, into that part of the body.
Yeah.
And if you find that chemical that'll do that thing, it'll stop that thing from happening, an allergy or a heart attack or whatever it is. And so we actually created a database of chemicals that researchers had created, that the chemistry researchers had created, that were maybe medicines. They were just experimental products. They're like, because all they cared about is like, well, can I stick a sulfur atom on this side of this benzene ring, or whatever it was. And then they would have other people that were looking at the proteins, and they're like, I just need something that'll fit into this spot. And so we created a database that you could actually search for chemical structures. And you could actually like draw out the chemical structure on the computer screen and search through that database. So that was an interesting project. And then after that, I wound up working on another company that was actually doing a therapy for non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And that was interesting because the concept they had was you take a sample of the person's cancer and you genetically sequence that, and you find what makes that cancer unique from the patient. Because remember, the whole point of a cancer is if something's running amok, it's uncontrolled growth of some particular cell line that's run amok in your body. And so they said, well, let's find out what makes that unique. And then what they did is they created a insect cell culture, oddly enough, to create more of that protein. And then the cancer unique cancer protein that was in that cancer, and they would then dissolve that, get that protein out, and bind something that they knew would force the immune system to attack it. And the concept was you inject that into the patient and you would train their immune system to attack their cancer. And this was done, like this was back in like the early 2000s. And the concept that we had was to train that immune system. And now you're starting to hear about more and more companies that are training people's immune systems to attack their cancers. And that was, I worked on all the manufacturing systems and things for them. And that was really fun and interesting. Unfortunately, our clinical trial failed. There were some issues with it. But I like to think we were a trailblazer for that kind of care. And then got involved with diagnostics, company that was, they created a test for HIV. So for the virus that causes AIDS. And it was a test for the molecular structure, the genetic pattern of the HIV virus in the donated blood. Before this test was created, it was the situation that a patient might be infected for half a year before their HIV levels would reach the point that it was detectable by a test. With this test, it was detectable within weeks of infection. So the kind of sensitivity of this led to them being able to create tests that were used for the entire country's blood supply to test for HIV. Because this back in the early 2000s during the whole AIDS epidemic was quite a concern to make sure that the blood supply was safe. And so I worked through all of these kinds of situations, and ultimately my father-in-law wound up at his situation where he was going blind. And he needed help, and I'm like, well, I've done like all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a computer guy, but I've been flexible in learning and figuring out, and it was all science stuff. And now I had to take a left turn and say, okay, how do I deal with my father-in-law's situation? Because I've never done, direct hands-on patient care. Like when I was in the operating room or, talking to patients, like I wasn't the one actually, talking to them or anything or doing anything with them. That was not my bag. I was a computer guy. And so I had to figure that out and say, okay, how can I help him? Because he didn't have any family in the immediate area. He was back in Indiana. Rest of the family was in other states, um, and he was going blind. And he had already moved into assisted living, but he was at a point where he couldn't see his bills, or he was blind.
Yeah.
And you don't think about how that impacts somebody when it like kind of creeps up on him. He had I'm trying to think, wet macular degeneration, and so he could like see light and dark,
Mhm.
and he could, for a while, if you like used a really bright light, you could he could make out the contrast and see things. And that progressed to the point where you'd have to like hold it off to the side to see something using just his peripheral vision. And so I was like trying to find like, lights that would help him to, like distinguish things. And it was eventually got to the point where, when I had to help, I had to become his power of attorney. And I had to learn what that meant. I had to figure out, well, what does that even mean? And then I had to learn, well, there's not just one kind of power of attorney. There's a medical power of attorney and there's a finance power of attorney, which I didn't know that. And understanding like, okay, now that I've done this, how do I remotely, because I'm in a different state, how do I help him to get things done? So I had to like plan to travel back there periodically to make sure that I got everything, that the people that were in the assisted living place would put his mail somewhere that I could get my hands on it. I did something that in retrospect was kind of dumb. I changed his mailing address to my house,
Oh, wow.
and which worked great because then I could get his bills.
Yeah.
But it turns out my state thought he lived here now, so they wanted to do his taxes.
Oh,
And so I shot myself and him in the foot. So that I had to like figure out how to deal with that.
yeah.
I had to like figure out, okay, he was on the Veterans Affairs program, so he was getting like his medicines. I had to make sure he's getting his medicines. I had to find out like where did he still, because like even though he didn't have his house anymore, he still had like a safe deposit box.
Mm.
And like where was his will? And it
Yeah.
turns out he had started a will, but he never finished the will. And it turns out there were like three different wills. So I had to
Oh,
like figure out like, which one's the right one. And he can't see them. So and he's in his memory at that point is starting to slip and is getting deaf. So I'm trying to talk to him on the phone and and have him be able to call me. And he's having trouble dialing the phone because he can't see the numbers. So we had to get him a phone that was made for people that don't have vision. So it would actually like say the number as you pushed each one. But then, he fortunately he could remember my phone number, but then like it had memory, like a speed dial, but he
yeah.
couldn't remember how to use the speed dial. So I would be on the phone explaining it to him like every week, over and over, trying to help him go. And like, okay, no, this is how you do this. This is how you call somebody else. You know, because like he had put like Velcro on the 5, so he could like navigate the keyboard and find where the other buttons were. And yeah, it was it was a tough situation. And we dealt with a lot of different kinds of things. Ultimately, he fell from his bed and broke his neck, and deceased after that. But I was talking to Yasmin, who's the founder of our organization, in another meeting for IT people, and commiserating. Is like, I'm an IT guy. I don't know what I'm doing here, and trying to like figure it all out. And as we're talking, she's like, well, I've got this organization that we're trying to like start to figure these things out and help people to understand what it is they need to do, how their family can help them, how can you make this a better experience for other people. So from pigs to power of attorney, there you go.
Yeah, it's a very interesting timeline that
Yeah.
you had there. And maybe some people watching this currently have a few questions for you about, your experience and how their experience might relate to your experience, or, how they might find, help from you or anything like that, and how they can connect with you. So if anybody currently wants to ask any questions from currently, you are allowed to.
Hi, Brad. Thank you so much for this. And in this short time frame, I learned so many new things about you and your experiences. It was really fascinating to hear your stories. So, Brad, if you had to redo some of the experiences in your life, would your trajectory look any different than it does?
Interesting question. Probably not. I've enjoyed all of my career, my family. Moving to this state was unfortunately a traumatic experience. We had a lot of things went wrong because our entire company moved. They lost our household furniture, and and then instead of delivering the household furniture to us, they delivered the desks of the company to my driveway. So they like swapped the desks and the household furniture, and like, why would any truck driver think that a residential house wants a bunch of desks?
Yeah.
Anyway, but we had unfortunately we had like a lot of like mishaps. I was trying to fix a plumbing issue, and I had like one of these trouble lights, the light bulb with a little metal cage around it. And I'm laying under the sink trying to like fix, and all of a sudden the plumbing didn't just like crack, it exploded. And the trouble light had it was, so basically the light burst, and we had water and electricity, and my family came running like, what happened? What happened? I'm like, stay away, don't get anywhere near me, you might get electrocuted. I, I would not do that part. But otherwise, yeah, it's been a good career arc. The thing I think that I would have done differently was to be more mindful of life experiences. For example, thinking about planning ahead, and working with family to understand what their plans were. And I was fortunate as a kid. I got a real tape recorder, old fashioned. Nowadays you just record stuff on your phone, but back then you had magnetic tape. And what happened was I was able to record my grandparents in their life stories, and I was so happy that I was able to do that. And I would encourage others, and I always encourage others, try to record your life stories of the people in your life before you don't have that chance anymore. my wife actually went so far as to write a book about her experience. It's a very short book. It's like 60 some pages, but and it's brief, but it has some old family photos that we scanned, and that just kind of helped her to kind of capture, what it was like for her with her family and her family's situation growing up. And I encourage others to do that as well, so that those stories, that knowledge isn't lost.
Very interesting. Wow. Well, if there's any other questions from any other participants currently, you are free to ask them. If not, I would like to segue to kind of, you know, your position as the Chief Information Officer for Village Core, and like how does that work with like the behind the scenes of everything, and getting ready for this nonprofit organization to help other people that were in a similar situation or have their own situation currently happening with their lives. So how does that
Okay.
like how do they get the help from you or from the rest of the board?
Right. So we're developing our website, villagecore.org, villagecore.org, not .com, .org. And on that website, we are putting resources to help people to navigate various issues that come about when you're getting older, to look at things from health issues, financial type issues, clothing, physical healthcare issues that may arise, the need for, adaptive clothing, for example, for continency aids. I mean, it sounds, when you're younger, you're like, oh, yuck, continence aids. But, as you get older, things happen. I had to have my prostate removed, and I needed that stuff. It's just the way it is. Things happen, and when these things happen, because so often we've not talked about them, you don't have a basis of knowledge. You just don't know. And so we're trying to create a place where people can go to get some more information. So there's resources on there. And also we're trying to book like these, for example, this kind of webinar where we can have more information that can help people to think about these things and to be educated about these kinds of things and to contribute themselves if they are so inclined. So, go to the website.
Yes. That's very interesting. All your life stories and how you got to this spot. That's all very interesting. And thank you so much, Brad. I think that's all the time we have for today. But hearing about everything that you've gone through was very interesting for me, and I think for the rest of the people watching, to learn kind of how you got to this point and all your life experiences that got you to this point. So thank you very much for meeting with me today.
You're welcome.